the legend himself, Peter Mansbridge. What's going on, Peter?
Hey, Nick. Hey, Jay. It's great to be here.
Great to
Thanks for
have you. How
coming.
you feeling about the Leafs right now?
I was at that game last night. It's frustrating. I mean, on the one hand, they just won 3 games in a row, and they looked pretty good in those 3. They looked pretty bad 4 games ago in that loss to New Jersey, I guess it was. And they didn't look good last night. I mean, last night was really the first night where I thought they really miss Marner. Marner could have been very helpful in this game. I don't know whether they would have won, but it would have looked better. I mean, they are playing without 4 first stringers, and that hurts. And they just looked bad last night. And of all teams to have to look bad against, Tampa was not the one you wanted, especially after doing so well against Florida the other night. But there were moments. There was Austin's goal. It was it was a great shot, and then Reeves did the Reeves thing, and that had the crowd pretty excited. But after that, it was flat. It was just really flat. And somehow Keefe's got to get that team back up and running again. And hopefully with all the players. Nick, you mentioned that the Marner may be back on Saturday. That would be a good thing. But he's not alone. There's Liljegren for all the ups and downs Liljegren causes us. There's Yarncroc. And there's Edmonston. I mean, we need all of those guys in the lineup if we're going to. I mean, I'm sure we're going to make the playoffs, but that first round, whoever it's against, you need those players back.
So it sounds like you follow the Leafs pretty closely, Mr. Mansbridge. What was it like being the voice in the face of Canadian media for a long time? Did you have to hide the fact that you were partial to the Maple Leafs, or how did that go?
First of all, I don't call you Mr. Rosehill. You better not call me Mr. Mansbridge again. Yeah, look, everybody assumed that I didn't like hockey because I used to make a big fuss about how hockey knocked us around on the national. Didn't our start time, especially during the playoffs, we were unfindable if you just wanted to watch news. But I've always been a hockey fan since I was a kid. I came from England. I was born in Britain. I didn't have much of a knowledge of hockey when I got here. I was 6 or 7 years old and turned up at the hockey rink with a cricket bat. It didn't look too good. But I started out in Ottawa. It was before the Senators were playing, and you had to choose between Montreal and Toronto if you grew up in Ottawa, and the rest of my family chose Montreal. I chose Toronto, and I've been with the Leafs ever since. I spent some time out west, and I cheered for the original Jets, the Bobby Hull Jets, in Winnipeg, and still have a feeling for that team. But deep in the heart, it's the Leafs. So I'm waiting like everybody else. I mean, I do remember the 60s. I was there. I saw that. It would be nice to see it again before I leave this planet.
Oh, it's wild, and every year it's the same conversation around this time. There's that angst, but the optimism that this could finally be the year. And I wanted to ask you from a news coverage standpoint, how big would it truly be if like the Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup? Of course, we saw with the Raptors, different scale, entire country and stuff like that. But could you give us a perspective, an idea of what the coverage would be like from a news standpoint?
Well, you have to look at the fact that when the Leafs travel around the league, no matter where they are, they get a good turnout in other people's barns. And so there is a thing about the Leafs, and you either hate them or you love them, no matter where you're living. So it'll be a story when you go this long without winning. It's going to be a story one way or the other. But let's not think too far ahead here. That's a bit of a gamble at the moment.
Why do you think it's been so difficult for them to win one? Do you think it's the pressure, the media, the city, or do you just think it just is what it is, or you think there's a reason you could point to?
I think it's a little bit. I hate to give this answer, but it is a little of all the things you mentioned, Jay. I mean, you know what it's like. You were there. You were in that dressing room. You had to face that phalanx of reporters who were, trying to get comments out of all of you after every game. So there is some of that. There is some of the sort of the media pressure that it revolves around this team. Although I look at this makeup of the team, and I don't think it bothers them that much. I don't see them getting all frazzled about media questions. Um, Austin seems to handle himself pretty well in front of the media. Of course, he mainly only has good days, so it's
Yeah.
it's not that hard. But most of them seem to take it in stride. I watched Riley last night, and he was great. I mean, they just got beaten relatively badly, but he handled it all well, and sort of next game up, and let's move on. But I'm not sure what the answer is as to why it's taken so long. I mean, it scares me the fact that no Leaf team has ever won more than 2 series, right?
Oh,
And
wild.
that is
Stop
wild.
it, Peter.
Yeah, I know. I worry about that. Now, mind you, these days it's the first 2 series that are the hardest to get those 2, and who knows what might happen.
Yeah.
I don't know those, the Eastern teams. They look pretty good, whether it's Florida or Tampa, Boston, Carolina, Rangers. I mean, they're all really good. Um, and if you got to get through that, then perhaps the Western teams won't look as difficult. And in fact, the Leafs have played well against the Western teams this year.
Mhm.
Do you have a preference on who you want them to play? Does it matter for you?
No, it doesn't matter. They all look terrifying. I don't know. I suppose, Florida has not had a good run this last little while. That can change overnight, as we all know. Nobody was giving them much of a time last year, and then Bobrovsky turned up hot, and that was that. So either one of the Florida teams are going to be a challenge, but I think Boston. I think we can take Boston, but I mean that last set 2 with Boston. I know Boston won the game, but we looked like a different team. I mean, it's the one thing I will say about this team this year. It's not the same team as last year. It's a different team. They got, there's a different energy in there. There's a different toughness. Whether it's enough to win or not, I don't know, but it's not going to be embarrassing like it has been in some years past.
Agreed. Going back to your career a little bit, Peter. I mean, we have lots of guests on this show, and we're kind of no talent bums, and we're just learning. But throughout your career, you've had everyone and anyone that you can ask for that you've interviewed. What's the biggest thing you learned about interviews that helped you through your career and how you conduct them?
Listen, it's the biggest challenge is listening to the answers you're getting. I mean, most people go into, and I know I did for a long time. You go into an interview with, kind of a list of questions in front of you, and you focus so much on the list, you're not listening to the answers. By the last 10 or 15 years that I was doing them regularly, and I do them now on my podcast, I don't write anything down. I just listen. I know basically what I want to talk about, and you go from there, and you listen to what the person has to say, and you pick up on those answers. That's usually where the best interviews come together. When both sides are listening, you know that you've got a good interview if you make the other person listen. I mean, a lot of the interviews I did, especially with the big name, famous politicians and leaders around the world, they'd been interviewed many, many times before. So there weren't many questions that would be a surprise to them. However, if you asked a question and there was a pause at the other end, you knew you were making them think. And that's what you want to do. That's what you guys want to do in your sessions with whether it's players or coaches, managers, what have you. You want to make them think about what they're saying, and that's where you end up getting usually the best answers.
If you had a chance to interview Auston Matthews, I like to ask a lot of our guests about Matthews, and I always bring up on this podcast how I'm pinching myself on a nightly basis where this guy's making goal scoring look way too easy, where it's like I've conditioned myself every game. Auston Matthews will score at least one goal. It happened against Tampa, but what can you say about the player and maybe intertwine that into a conversation about some of your favorite Leafs of all time?
Well, my favorite Leaf growing up was Dickie Duff. who's still alive today. He's he's in his 80s, and I've had a chance to talk to him a couple of times. And I was a huge fan of his. I mean, it was a different era. It was when if he got 20 goals in a season, that was a huge deal. Trying to conceive of getting 63 or whatever he's at now, it just never entered our minds back then until I guess it might have been Phil Esposito was the first one I started racking up big goal totals. But I watch Auston, and he just looks like he's been conditioned for this all his life. I remember I was following him when he looked like the likely first round draft pick, and we were hopefully going to get that pick. But he was playing in Switzerland. I thought, this is really interesting. This guy could be playing in the OHA or the Western League or the Quebec Major League, whatever. But he chose to go to Switzerland to play with men, right?
Yeah.
And get conditioned that way. And that was kind of a personal choice that he made. I know his mother went over there, I think, with him and did a lot of the cooking for a while. I mean, he's from a tight family. His sister's a really good golfer. And I've met him, met his dad on the golf course. Not surprisingly, like most of you guys, hockey players, you can golf really well, and he does too. But he just seems like an all around guy. I don't know. I don't know him, personally, but you hear these stories around town, the stuff he does, especially at sick kids, and where he does things as part of the community that he doesn't talk about. There are no cameras there, so he kind of just does it because he believes in it, and good for him, and good for him that he's having such success. It was funny the other night when he got that second, his second empty net goal. You could see that what did he do first? He tried to pass it to Nylander. He could have taken the shot right away for himself, but he tried to pass it to Nylander to get him a goal. It got blocked or something, got hung up in somebody's pads, and he's just whacked it then down the ice himself. But that said a lot to me about the guy. I mean, listen, he obviously would love to get to 70. And you watch every game, he's getting 6 to 10 shots a game. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah. But there he was, with 2 minutes left or whatever it was, and he could have had it then, but he chose to give it to somebody else. I thought he was going to go the whole year without scoring an empty net goal, which would have been kind of nice in a way, because there are a lot of others who pile up the empty net goals. Not him.
True. He seems to have it all. I mean, we were talking the other day about how he's, there's no defensive liability in them. He gets in there, he works hard. Like, there's really no drawback to the guy. And you start to talk about him personally as well. He seems like a guy anyone would be proud to have on their team. But I want to put you on the spot right now, Peter, before we wrap. What is your prediction for the Maple Leafs in the playoffs this year?
I don't want to jinx them. I like the fact, and you were nodding, Jay, so I think you agree that they're a different team. And because they're a different team, I give them more of a chance than they had last year. So I would like to see them get by 2 rounds. To me, that would be like winning the cup. If they can get by 2 teams, whoever those 2 are, that'll be quite an accomplishment. So I'm going to say they get through 2 rounds, and hopefully I don't live to regret that. Tell me this, Jay. When you were playing, you played what? Leafs and Flyers. Yeah. Did you see anybody like him in terms of a player, like what appears to be an all-round player? Not just a great goal scorer, but he does a lot of things so well.
Yeah, I mean, Sidney Crosby's kind of the guy that just covers the gamut, right? And he's got the leadership and everything like that. And, that paid off for him throughout his career. But I don't think that Auston gets enough credit for, like, yes, he's a pure goal scorer. puts up the big numbers. People will knock that he doesn't have enough assists, but I mean, when he goes out there in those tight situations and when the battle gets high, he's more well-rounded than I think people give him credit for. And like you said, he's level-headed. He's never controversial. He doesn't get worked up about the media. Like, he's just got a good head on his shoulders. And for a player with that much talent to be that well-rounded, I think is rare. And we're super lucky to have him.
I'll say. And you know that if he had more assists, people would be saying, why don't you shoot?
Seriously.
Same old same in this market. It's pretty crazy, but we're ready to get hurt again. Peter, can't thank you enough. This has been unbelievable. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Jay. It's been a treat talking to you both.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long-form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Rosehill. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.